Hi, Martha. It's so nice to see you.
It's so good to be seen by you and back at you. You have the skyline, I've got real trees and lots of
I know.
construction traffic just to add
Yeah.
ambiance moving around. Yeah, so here we get to chat and have
I
moments
love
of
chatting with
wisdom.
you, Dr.
Yes.
Twaddle.
Okay, we're
Yeah.
going to impart wisdom to those who choose to listen to this, okay? You ready?
Great. Tall order. Let's see how.
So Nate, I would love for you to reflect a bit your wonderful time as president. And what years were you president? What years was
Let's see. What years was I president? I was president 2020 to 2021 was my actual president year.
that? That was a tough
And so I
year.
was president before that and the year after. Yeah, well, it was definitely an interesting year, right? So Rodney Tucker was the first pandemic president, as we like to say at the Academy, and I was the second pandemic president.
Yeah.
So Rodney was the first virtual assembly, and I was the second virtual assembly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
during that time, that tenure, and I realized having been president way back in 2023, before there was internet and things like that, we didn't have virtual assemblies in not 2023. What am I saying? 2003 is when I was president 20 years ago. Isn't that
Wow.
amazing? When
Yeah.
dinosaurs walked the earth.
Martha.
And actually, when I was president, it was really interesting because that's when the year we changed the meeting time from the summer to kind of the early spring, end of winter. So I had the distinct opportunity to not just oversee one, but two different Academy gatherings.
That's a piece of Academy trivia I've never heard before. That's so interesting. I've never ever heard that before.
Yeah, it was quite,
Yeah.
and it's also when we changed to the AMC to support us. So lots of amazing things in my tenure. But going back to you, just that was a really interesting time, and I'm curious to hear and share with our listeners some of the things that showed up for you during that time as president, in particular things that you feel were unique challenges or opportunities that took shape because of the timing of your presidency and you in that role.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so first of all, I was president 2021 to 2022. I just had to look it up because all the pandemic years kind of merged together. I don't really remember what I said. So Martha, I think your question about kind of opportunities in a challenging time is a really interesting one. Because I'll say a couple things. There was the pandemic uncertainty, although by that time we were almost more than a full year in, so that made a big difference.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there was, a sense of, okay, well, we could just focus on the pandemic, or we could also kind of hunker down and say, while we're focusing on the pandemic, and we know all these things are being canceled kind of in person, where are the pieces we can really hunker down and concentrate? And so that's what we did. We spent a lot of time supporting our members and their needs in the community, whether it was palliative care or hospice or academic or in the community, really focusing on what they needed during the pandemic. But we also did a lot of really interesting things. We created a diversity, equity, and inclusion task force and had a consultant come in to give us some ideas about how we could really focus on diversity and what equity even means in a professional organization at every level: trainees, staff, board members, etc. And at the same time, we did an internal look at our governance structure to figure out, how are we finding the right people to put in leadership positions as we position the Academy going forward. And I like to think that the two are very related, and that, trying to think about governance goes hand in hand with thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really figuring out how we mean that from the broadest sense possible around equity and inclusion as a professional organization that represents so many individuals. And so I think it was a difficult time. It was a challenging time. We were, of course, really sad to cancel the second assembly in person. And at the same time, we worked really hard to kind of rethink what we were doing and think about it as like, okay, well, not business as usual. How can we really innovate and do some interesting work now while we're trying to figure out what the new normal looks like?
Yeah, you know, it's funny to use that term business as usual, because when does that really ever exist if you think about it? You know, nothing's routine,
Yeah.
right? And reflecting 20 years back when I was president, the inclusion and diversity was underneath the academics versus the community, and
Right, right.
trying. And you know what I see, and I'm so grateful that the Academy is so committed to this, is a big tent, a big tent. With this is a place where hopefully anyone who loves this kind of work, irrespective of how they express it, irrespective of who they are and where they come from, might find a home, might find a tribe. And that, as it keeps growing and developing, that's so exciting. I didn't realize that the task force happened during your time as president. Wow.
Yeah, we kicked it off during our time. It was an
Mm-hmm.
18-month process, so extended
Yeah.
beyond my time. But I was really proud to have really focused on and do that work, start that
Yeah.
work.
So Nate,
Yeah.
looking ahead, what do you think? You're in this field, you're working, and obviously you're on the East Coast, I'm in the Midwest, but so there's slight nuances of some of the challenges. But what do you think are some of the big challenges that are emerging, and opportunities? So I look at them as hand in hand. Challenges are oftentimes a place
Yes.
where we can again innovate, take stock of what's needed, and think creatively.
I completely agree with you. And I think there are the challenges that we always think about, which is how do we, and I'm going to use your language because I think it's so perfect. And how do we really make sure everyone finds a place underneath that tent, right?
Yeah.
Hospice, academics, palliative, pediatrics. I still think that making sure that the hospice community feels included and the academy doesn't feel too academic ivory tower is incredibly important.
Mm-hmm.
I think our peds colleague, we need to continue to work with our peds colleagues to make sure they have a place to feel at home and that we're their professional society. I think the thing, and I know, Martha, you and I have talked about this before, is also thinking about where is the role for, whether we're going to call it for-profit or novel models or risk strategies or risk contracting in both palliative and hospice. I got to say, academic and in the community, it's not just touching one place, is something that I think is at the same time, again, as always, Dr. Twaddle, my mentor, as you just said, a strength, a threat, and an opportunity. Yeah. And I know we've both done some work in this space. The data are clear that some of the outcomes that the for-profits or the risk contracting, particularly upside risk, look a little different, and their outcomes are different, and no model is perfect. I think the thing that we have to work on is, instead of throwing the baby out with the bathwater and saying that model is terrible, we can't do it, how do we work with our partners in private equity, venture capital, in the commercial spaces, because they are innovating. They are out there moving much faster than we are in academics, in hospice, or in palliative care, I have to say. And we have so many graduates in our programs, our trainees who are kind of going into these fields and are, I think, ill-prepared, because those of us teaching them kind of aren't that familiar with these kinds of models and environments. And I think that's a really interesting place to go. And I know that you have thoughts about that I'd love to hear.
Yeah, the first things that shows up for me is always that saying, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if we're going to influence what is going to be created and what's going to be delivered for our patients and their families and our communities, we need to be a part of the process. So the aversion or the discounting or the avoidance of of this type of care delivery model is not a good idea. We want to be there. We want to influence it. And you're 100% right. What I find exciting, and I always hope that there's a way to wed the for-profits who leverage investment to work to outcomes in a very rapid way with quality improvement and outcomes kind of measuring to then inform the next iteration, which is defined in terms of days to weeks versus years. Coupling that with the nonprofit and community-based and academics, and really informing with good research. Again, we have to be part of this because it is very, very difficult, as we both know, to innovate within an academic medical center. They're very risk averse, and it's glacial in its process.
Yes.
And the challenge, though, is in the for-profit space or the investment space. The innovation may be brilliant and wonderful, and yet disappear. It's like, okay, you did this, it was great, wow, and nobody sustained it because of whatever reason. So, but I want our Academy members to understand how to move in that space. I think we need to be having sessions about this, talking about this, explaining what the business models might look like, and really encouraging people to train even more broadly in business and such, so that they can walk in that environment as well.
I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. And I think, one of the things I learned as president is what it really meant to be a member organization, and that really everything the Academy does is for its members, whether it's advocacy or payment reform or education or training or policy, or wellness, governance, all of the above. It's really to help our members move forward in their daily lives and in their work lives. And I think this is a place the Academy can really lead. Again, to use your model, kind of bring everyone together under that tent at the table to say, like, look, we're all trying to improve the care of folks with serious illness and their families. We're all doing it in different ways. How do we work together to move this work forward? And I think that is the goal of any professional society like the Academy, is to really do that work and do it well, to be the convener and the facilitator.
Yeah. And that's so well said. And the facilitation of it, really equipping, empowering, energizing, and bringing folks together, creating a space where people can collaborate. Because in those meetings, sometimes the product is even better than it would be if they didn't have that opportunity to work with others.
Again, no way to say that better.
The other piece I think is, some people put on this, these blinders around uneven understanding what it means when people say for profit versus non-for-profit. One thing I love about the nonprofits is their community emphasis and their service emphasis and giving back. And obviously in a nonprofit model, not all of them engage at that level. But yet at the for-profit level, they have to have a very clean and sustainable business model, because they can't use philanthropy to fund their operations. So there's something to be learned. And I always am chilled by folks who just label, if you're a for-profit, therefore you must not practice quality. And there are some in the industry that have demonstrated they're not putting the outcomes. But I've also seen that same type of thing in the nonprofit folks. And I've seen amazing commitment to quality and outcomes in the for-profit industry, and some of the ones I've had the opportunity to work with.
I agree. And one of the things that we've been working on at Sinai is partnering with our for-profit folks and using their shop to deliver sort of the quality care they're delivering, and also kind of a research incubator. From a compliance standpoint, always the money separate, right?
Yes.
But really kind of think about how do we continually innovate and do research on a model like that. And so it is this kind of interstitial space between for-profit and not-for-profit, or corporate and academic, or there's a lot of different words, and I think the problem is the connotations often come with a
Yes.
whole set of baggage. We know words is so important in the work that we do.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so really, again, figuring out how we can all kind of innovate together using each of our strengths and understanding each other's limitations, I think is a really interesting space that if we ignore is a threat, and if we
Yes.
embrace is really an opportunity.
Yes. And again, as part of the embracing is being clear on what it is that we hope to see and being part of the discussions to lead to the shaping of that. For the first time, the Circle of Life Award gave a citation to Prospero, which is now Optum. And because what they're doing is quality palliative care for people who, they are building out our tents, so to speak. And an opportunity, when you receive the Circle of Life, either award or citation, you're making a commitment to teach, you're making a commitment to share. And one of the challenges sometimes in the for-profit industry is they get proprietary and they don't want to share. But if you're going to be part of our tent, you got to show up,
that's great.
not just to take, but to also teach and share and give insight to others who want to be either part of your work or learn from what it is you're doing.
Yeah, well said. Martha, as always, a delight to chat with you.
Let's do this again. It's nice having coffee with you in the
mid-afternoon. Oh, I wish I'd
mid-morning.
known. I would have had my coffee here. I have it in spirit.
It's
All right,
always
Martha.
a joy.
Always a joy.
Bless you
Thank
in the
you
work
so
you
much.
do, my friend. Bless you.
Likewise to you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.